It was preteen week. And if you've ever spent any time around preteen girls, you know that there's a higher than normal likelihood of some drama and gossip and things like that taking place. And Taylor was one of those girls who had a particular taste for that. And the week started off well. The cabin got along and everything was fine. But as it went on, Taylor slowly alienated herself through her desire for gossip from the rest of the cabin. And pretty soon, they all refused to talk to her. And so she was hurt, and she realized that she hurt them, and she felt bad about that. But they weren't talking to her, and there was nothing she could really do. And so the cabin leader got involved and pulled everyone together and had them sit down and share their feelings. And pretty soon they were hugging it out, and they were all fast friends again, and it was all good. And then a little while later, Taylor came up to the cabin leader, and she said, "You know, when I was on the outside looking in, I prayed that God would help them to forgive me." And she saw God answer prayer, and it impacted her. As I looked through my list of stories that I try and keep track of through summer, I found story after story after story of God answering prayer. And it's fitting because prayer is one of KLBC's core values, along with excellence and relationships and the local church. There was this 1 week, Cabin E. It was a smaller group of guys. And one particular camper was kind of the glue that held the cabin together. Like, he was a really good influence in the cabin. Like, he brought a lot of good energy. And like, kids that bring energy in cabins are relatively common, but it's not usually like good energy. Not too far into the week, he started to get sick. Had to spend the night in the nurse's cabin, and it looked like he was going to have to go home the next morning. As the cabin leader helped him carry his sleeping bag and stuff to the nurse's cabin, he was praying. And similarly, the rest of the cabin is back with the junior cabin leader, and they're praying for him and like renaming their cabin after him in hopes that that'll inspire healing or something. And sure enough, the next morning he wakes up and he's fine. He's able to stay the rest of the week. And the boys saw it as this clear answer to prayer, because God moves at camp. And for many of our young people, whether campers or staff members, seeing prayer answered at camp is kind of one of the first times that they see that. I mean, it's one of our core values, right? Prayer comes up a lot. And so there's lots of opportunities for prayers to be answered. And they see it happen, and they realize God actually, he cares. He actually hears my prayers, and he does something about it. And it impacts them. As mentors this summer, we meet with each of our cabin staff at least once a week. And one of the questions we asked them one week was, how has camp impacted your faith? And the answers were pretty varied. A lot of our staff talked about how the community had been a really impactful thing. Friendships with other people their own age who loved Jesus, or slightly older who they could look up to and aspire to be like as they pursued Christ. That community that was formed was really significant for them. Others talked about scripture. There's verses everywhere, and there's Bible Mem, and there's chapels, and you couldn't help but be impacted by the Bible. And it developed this hunger and this yearning in them for it. Others talked about worship or chapel speakers, which you would expect. Others talked about how they showed up thinking they kind of had it figured out, and very quickly realized they didn't know anywhere near as much as they thought. That they actually weren't capable of solving all the problems that they encountered. And they got to the end of themselves, and they had to go, God, help! And they saw him show up. And it's a significant thing. And that's how our staff had been impacted. But what about campers? Well, the reality is our staff used to be campers. 83% of our staff team this summer used to be campers at KLBC. So they're just a few years removed from that camper thing. Usually we just don't get to hear from the rest of the group. But there are exceptions. A couple days after camp ended, I was sitting at a table right about there on Sunday morning, and there was a lady visiting out from Alberta. She used to live here, I think. And it came up that I work at Kenosi Lake Bible Camp. And so she started telling me how just the other day she'd been out with an old friend who's a grandma now for coffee. And this grandma started telling her how her grandson had been a camper at KLBC this summer. And when he came home, he just couldn't stop talking about all the things he'd learned. All the Bible stories he knew and the verses he'd memorized. She said, I think if he'd been there for just a couple more days, he'd have been full on preaching at us. And think about that for a second. This kid came to camp and he was impacted. It's kind of crazy, but it's normal enough. We don't think much of it. He went home and he told his family, and he told his extended family. And his extended family told random old friends. And pretty soon, this lady from 8 hours away was being encouraged by what God had done through camp in this kid's life this summer. We have no idea how God uses the ripples of our small faithfulness to grow his kingdom. It's such a joy to be a part of it and to see the kids being impacted. It's incredible. And it wouldn't be possible without the prayers of men and women like you. We have a lot of people who serve on the front lines, and they get to have those one-on-one conversations and lead kids to Christ and share the Bible with them. And we have other people who haul garbages or clean bathrooms or prepare food. And then there are still others who are back at home and are praying. And all of those roles are so critical. And so thank you. If you want to continue in prayer, one of the great ways to do it is we have a 30-day prayer guide. It gives you a little prompt each day through the 30 days of the month that you can use to remind you how to pray for camp, not just in summer, but all year long. So we'd love to have you partner with us in that way, to continue to see God move at camp and also to know that he's moving in ways that we cannot see.